Good afternoon, everyone. Let me start by saying welcome to those who are attending. I'm Nazira, the CEO and the co-founder of Vendorship, Inc. Thank you and welcome. Thank you to our speakers, Siva Nataraja, Jeremy Duvall, and Darren Gilstrap for joining us for a constructive and a meaningful discussion on a much needed topic, healthcare IT, the past, present, and the future of healthcare. Yeah. So we hope again that our conversation will be a constructive discussion today. We are happy to have with us our Vendorship team in the background. Madhu is moderating with questions, and also thank other team members, Seema, Sabina, Susan, and Asmina from our Vendorship team. And thank you again. Siva, let's give a brief profile about you. You are currently the co-founder and the president of Jogo Health. You have almost 23 years of clinical safety and post-marketing experience in pharmaceutical and medical device industries. You had a previous venture, Cementelli, which was acquired by a huge clinical research organization with the 11 billion in revenue. So you served as a general manager for 6 years there, and you also have two US patents. You'd love to hear about it, Siva, the journey of how you've gone through this all. So we can't wait to hear from you, Siva, but thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. Next, we have Jeremy. Jeremy Duvall and our team works closely these months, and we appreciate one thing that I would tell, and anybody would tell our team if they had, like, he's just brutally honest, right? And which is nice. You just get to hear the real feedback. So Jeremy is the founder of 7Factor Software, a custom DevOps and a cloud-based system and software company that builds from the beginning for stability, security, and scalability for large tech-savvy corporations and growth stage startups with high growth potential. And Jeremy is a software craftsman with more than a decade of experience in building and advising others on how to build rugged, performant, and beautiful software. Wow, I've never heard the word beautiful software in nearly every industry. So he founded 7Factor in 2017 with the commitment to build a smart, flexible, human-centric team of experienced software architects. And you've really done well, Jeremy. We continue to wish you all the best and the best wishes and to shine further. Darren is the founder. Darren Gilstrap and I go way back, probably 7 to 8 years back when I was in the county. And Darren was a part of our coalition. And I mean, he was a wealth of information, intelligent person who, taught us to talk beyond. Sometimes when you're in the government sector, there are very, very few people who come to actually educate you. And Darren was such who helped me educate, especially on the technology field, on how messages are got through. And we can't just sit in our boardrooms and preach. It has to go into the community sometimes. So Darren, I still see you haven't changed a bit. And now you accept that you are in New York area, and you are the founder and managing director for Inner City MD, a diversified digital health content, media technology, and advertising service agency. It's also custom designs and deploys connected TV and smart speaker apps, channels for local, regional, national, and reaching physician societies, hospitals, public health agencies, and that's how we met Darren, and patient advocacy groups and therapeutic brands. So Inner City MD is a culmination of Darren's 35 years of experience in medical academia, clinical bedside technology, and biopharma. And Darren, if I had to say one more paragraph, I'm just going to put one word to the entire paragraph, and I'm going to say you're all about equity.
Yes.
So thank you. Thank you for being here.
Yes.
Well, let me ask you the first question. What is one lesson you learned or a skill that you learned during the lockdown period, Siva?
So definitely the skill of telemedicine, although we were a telemedicine first company, because Jago treats stroke patients and pain and incontinence patients, especially people who don't have access to the care in remote areas, especially minorities. So the skill I learned is how do you reach these patients? Not so much about, I would say, like a hard skill, kind of a soft skill, right? You run into patients who don't have broadband in inner cities, right? So So how do you handle in this new age a patient who has a limited bandwidth data plan on her phone, right? So how do you reach? So I would say, but the skill I learned is either learned something completely new, which is we all take it for granted that broadband and everything is all for everybody, right? So what the pandemic taught me, the inequality, the equal inequality in the society, that people don't have access to things that we normally think we do have access to. So that's what really the pandemic taught me from a technology perspective. So
So
I would
good, you
say
learned certain things are not for granted always, and
exactly,
we have to
yeah.
extend beyond. So Siva, let me ask you this question as well. As a child, what did you want to be when you wanted to grow up?
I wanted to be a pilot because I never seen an airplane. I only saw a plane up there because I grew up in Sri Lanka in a remote area which didn't have anything. The only thing we had was a radio. So, but the flights go up, right? So I look up and I say, I want to be a pilot one day. So,
Okay.
no,
Is that still under consideration?
not at all.
Okay. So Jeremy, what was one lesson or skill that you learned during your lockdown period?
Oh, geez, how to parent. We just had our first daughter during the pandemic, and it was an interesting challenge that we'd never seen before. But it was also really cool because I think not a lot of parents get the opportunity to watch their child go from super tiny, little bitty, can barely roll over to now she's like pulling up on stuff and trying to eat dirt and doing all kinds of really fun things. So to me, that's been a really cool journey because it also kind of reminds me of how, my company has started and sort of you see that go from inception to growth, and you see us starting to crawl, and then we're running, and then we're walking, and then we're sort of moving forward. So just being able to sort of extrapolate about the growth process has been really just an interesting thing. I've had sort of a front row seat to. On the more interesting, I guess, in technology side, it's obvious that having a video presence is different. I'm used to being in the same room with people, even though I'm a developer. I've been writing code for 15 years and I don't like people, but I'm more than happy to sit across from you and have a conversation about what your technology challenges are. So it's been interesting to adjust to what it's like to have a completely remote company, which we started as, and we kind of thought we knew how to do well. But then how do you build a culture remotely? How do you create a sense of belonging to a company when you're all in different states and you're all across different places and you don't have a chance to gather in the same room and have a conversation with that person and be able to sort of read their body language and read their inflection of their speech along with their facial sort of the things they're doing with their face. So it's been learning how to be remote, I guess. And being a developer, I thought I knew how to be remote. I obviously had no idea because we're forced to be to the extreme of remote during the pandemic.
Definitely. So did you want to be a developer when you were a child?
No, I wanted to be a pilot as well.
Oh my gosh,
I wanted to be a fighter pilot, actually. So represent.
Very nice. Darren, let me ask you the question. What was one skill or lesson you learned?
I would have to say, patience, becoming a virtue, and Steve and I are about 15, 20 miles from each other, I guess, give or take. But I live right on the Harlem River, East River confluence, George Washington Bridge, Yankee Stadium. And it was quite interesting during the first couple of months of the pandemic, where I'm used to seeing traffic from 1 in the afternoon till 8 at night. Literally, you can toss a pin across the entire northwest of Manhattan in the Bronx. And you're saying to yourself, what do we actually break this time? I mean, is this the real deal? Because you would not see anything but ambulances going up and down the highway. And those ambulances, I believe, were actually rapid morgue trucks. They weren't bringing patients back and forth between Harlem and Columbia Presbyterian. I think they were just morgue trucks trying to move the bodies back and forth. But I don't know, I just kind of had this sort of sci-fi experience and said to myself, okay, this could be the long journey for us as a country or as a world, as a global. And I think we just have to look at this globally, big picture, take a breath in and say, okay, just hunker down, use your expertise in academia, use your expertise in thinking, and hopefully we'll get out on the other end of this thing. Sounds kind of sort of all over the place, but literally I sat at the window looking at the highway, which was empty, for 2.5, 3 months as Cuomo locked down the city, locked down the state, and was not really sure where we were going to end up. And so I guess the long story short is that I learned about patience. I learned that, it's really just, I had to put my company, I was teaching remotely kids in Pennsylvania at the college and university. And I'm trying to coach my students to say, hey, don't worry about your grades because the entire country is no longer graduating from college or high school. There are no SATs. I'm a parent of a 17-year-old going to college. Yeah, no SATs, no prom. So welcome, Jeremy, to parenthood. I mean, welcome so there's no prom, no graduation. So I think it was just patience. It's a virtue. And also as being an entrepreneur, you realize there's patience.
Definitely. So Darren, what did you want to be when you grew up? Or as a child, what did you want to be?
Probably my second choice was a firefighter. My dad was a firefighter for 30 years in the Bronx. So, you kind of do things that you are used to seeing that are fun as a kid. But I know I was definitely into dirt. I was definitely into cutting up worms. But I also like hanging out in the firehouse with my dad and all of his friends. So I have to say somehow some kind of science, first responder, hodgepodge. And it's a good question, Nazira, because I guess I'm doing that right now. I'm very much into cardiovascular sciences and acute care medicine and emergency cardiac care and teaching those things. But yeah, I still like to dig into the organs.
Definitely.
So that is a really good question.
And you bring the diversity aspect as well. So that's great, Darren. The next question I'm asking is for all three of you. And Siva, if you can start, and as we know, HealthIT has helped drive progress in the healthcare field, right, over the last decade. But it also has brought in challenges, especially for the clinical community, where as community and the receiving end, we don't see much of that except the practicing physicians or the clinicians. But the question to you is, how are you using, each one of you, right? So I'll start with Siva. How are you using HealthIT tools to support coordinated, integrated healthcare, including any other objectives that you have with your model that you talked about? So if you can speak about one specific tool that you've developed through your company, and you say how have you coordinated or integrated health with it, right? How are you bringing different data sources together to your model that you have, right? And what human services data are you making an impact on? And are there any standards that exist to support its use? I know it's a long question, but I wanted to leave it to you first to speak about the passionate products that you've developed.
Yeah. So let me explain what we do, then we'll get into this, right? So Jago uses a wearable sensor, right, and an app that uses some kind of machine learning AI to treat stroke, right, chronic pain, and prenatal, postnatal incontinence in women, right? Primarily, this is developed to treat patients who don't have access to care, because you don't have a good rehab in some towns. Even if you look at my town, which is reasonably close to New York City, you don't get really good rehab like large hospitals. So what we do, essentially, why Jago came out of NYU. The researchers Joseph Brodney and Gordon Silverman. Gordon Silverman, by the way, invented EasyPass. So he's the co-inventor of EasyPass. So that's where the name comes from. So it was developed as a HealthIT tool. It developed, as we call it, digital therapeutics, but developed as a HealthIT tool to solve the problem of access to care when it comes to rehabilitation, right? You have access to care. You could do a telemedicine with the doctor. But what happens when you have a stroke? Now, during COVID, you cannot go to a hospital, right, to get rehab. You could get acute care, then they're discharging you after 2 days. Now, you can't visit a physiotherapy place. It's probably 20, 30 miles from your house. And how do you solve this problem? So we brought this into this mix to primarily solve the problem of access to quality rehab. By the way, the technology is also superior than regular rehab. So, for example, when somebody gets, regular physiotherapy for stroke, but when they get Jago treatment, it works better than physiotherapy. But at the same time, more importantly, we are solving the problem of access. So the first question is, we started as a HealthIT company, and it kind of, the pandemic has made it more important and kind of opened up. I think I talked about in my previous intro. I mean, you can just, the challenge has been, okay, now I have this tool. If the patient in her house doesn't have a data plan to talk to the therapist remotely, then what's the use of it, right? So you still have issues with this. So that's one challenge. The data sources you talked about, Rajita, the data sources are, so right now we just treat the patients, we ship a unit to the patient, and the patient uses Jago at home to treat stroke, chronic low back pain, migraine, and incontinence in women. The data sources are primarily historical EMR data, right? That's what we use for machine learning. So, for example, it's a personalized kind of medicine for a patient, right? So we look at the patient's gender, race, age, and we personalize the treatment for the patient. For that, we use a lot of EMR data, right? So how another patient has recovered a particular protocol comes in handy to treat a particular patient. So the nice thing about this HealthIT, I would say, as overall, by bringing these data sources, you're solving a major problem that happens in clinical trials where minorities are less represented, right? You don't get, if you look at all the diabetes drug, the representation of minorities in this data set is very, very low. So how do you know a certain drug works for a certain group of people? We don't know, right? But in the EMR data, you're treating everybody, right? So you'll be able to get access to that data, and you can kind of personalize it. So the data sources are EMR data, and historical literature data is what we get. So I guess I answered your question.
Yes, no, definitely. And do you see the impact? And do you get to see the impact? And I'm sure you're measuring it as well.
Oh yeah. I can give you anecdotal examples. There was a soccer player in Boston who was, having chronic pain. He gave up his soccer game primarily because he couldn't go to a rehab facility and get himself treated for the chronic pain. And the other thing we do is we take people off of opioids, right? We don't want them to be on opioids. So he emailed us. He was actually on a clinical trial at Harvard with Jago. He emailed us saying, hey, for the first time I'm on a soccer field after 7 years, right? That I'm playing soccer, which is huge. Then there was a teacher. She's 52 years old, I think. She told us that she was never able to stand and teach because she would have incontinence and she would leak, and she's wearing diapers. And for the first time, she's now able to teach standing up, right? Which is a huge deal for a teacher. Now she's actually trying to teach sports. So yeah, the impact has been amazing when you hear personal stories like this, when somebody says, I had incontinence, my whole, confidence is gone, and I'm able to do this. And another patient who says, I'm able to play soccer after having so many years of chronic pain. And if you really look at all these cases, it's not that this patient with chronic pain wouldn't have got treated. If he had gone to a Mayo Clinic or Cleveland Clinic, he would have got treated. He didn't have that access, right? So we kind of brought the Cleveland Clinic to his home through this platform. And also for this patient with incontinence, their incontinence get treated in various ways, and we are bringing this to these patients' home, right? So the impacts are great. Yeah.
Very nice, Siva. Real-time life examples, very nice. I'll remember them for some time. Jeremy, let's go to you. The question is, how are you using, and maybe you want to talk about well entry or something else that you have developed as a tool. Has these tools, have you coordinated or supported integrated care with that model?
Yeah, I think the best thing to talk about is probably well entry. I mean, we are not a healthcare company, right? We're a software engineering services company, and we do consulting across multiple industries. When COVID-19 hit, the obvious place to go was healthcare, because healthcare being one of the bigger industries that was a bit insulated from all of the various market changes, it made sense. And we had a local company that we engaged to talk with about developing during lockdown a badge that they could use that would allow them to go about and during lockdown. And it was a mobile application that we developed with this company. And that enabled these caregivers to be able to get to their homes and to serve their given families. I think this particular company has over 30,000 caregivers across the United States that all works with children. They're a pediatric home health care company. They all work with at-risk children, folks with trachs, and all kinds of different issues that require them to be very careful about how they approach those families and make sure that they're being safe when they enter the premises. So we started with the badge thing, but then they came to us and said, hey, you know what would be really cool if you guys could just add to our EVV application the ability to do COVID-19 screenings, because we want to make sure that our families and caregivers are safe. And so we worked with them, and we actually developed an independent application called Well Entry, and it was an idea of let's provide a COVID-19 screening solution on top of vaccination tracking. Let's provide a compliance framework for all of these healthcare officials that want to go into someone's home, especially if those folks are at risk, or a hospice company, or for example, a home health company of sorts. And so we developed that application in tandem with them, with a large company. And the cool thing is that these caregivers are able to safely go and serve their families. They have all of the appropriate compliance boxes checked. They can go in and make sure that they're not potentially carrying COVID-19 into that family and into that extended family. So that was probably the best example that we have, but we've also worked inside this company for doing a lot of other things around healthcare IT. And I'm sure everyone on the phone knows that healthcare tends to live in the 90s, at least it does right now. So we're cutting edge software engineers. I hire people from Google and Amazon and places like that. So we kind of walk in and we're like, wait, what, COBOL? So it's kind of an interesting environment to work in. And I've very much enjoyed getting to know this industry because, again, being a consultant in my nature and a curious person, I always want to know a lot about the industries that I'm working in. So I've learned a lot, and the other two gentlemen on the phone probably know 1,000 times more than me when it comes to how healthcare technology has evolved, where it's coming from, and where it's going. But my perspective is some random Georgia Tech graduate walking into an industry I've never seen and going, what is going on? Why are we using old stuff? Why are we driving 1930s Fords when we've got Lambos right there on the lot? So what I'm trying to do, and sort of my approach, has been to take a more progressive approach to healthcare IT. And again, I'm not saying that others aren't trying to do this. There are plenty of small companies and large companies that are attempting to do this, but I'm walking into like the my charts of the world and looking at these things and saying, what is this? Why does it work the way it does? Why do we architect it this way? And we're trying to approach these problems from an innovative direction, like the EVV problem, which is an issue for anyone who wants to be able to get Medicare and Medicaid claims. You have to be able to support longitude and latitude on your EVV claims. And a lot of products have already done this, but this is one of those things that it took people a long time to recognize that you can use a mobile application to solve this problem instead of, using paper, instead of writing everything down as we go. So back to your data question, data, I think we've not even really scratched the surface on what you can do with data when it comes to healthcare. Because I have friends that have worked in ad tech, which is a heavily artificial intelligence driven area. I've done a little bit of AI in my own, but I'm not an expert by any shared form or fashion. But we have so much opportunity right now where if we take advantage of the right frameworks and we solve problems in an innovative way, I think in the next 10 years, you could see some serious impact on access to care across multiple ethnic groups, across multiple, at-risk communities, across lower income communities. If we only thought about how to use technology in an innovative way, I think we could probably solve a lot of issues that we're just not paying attention to right now.
Very, very well said. So, Jeremy, the question I have is, I was able to actually relate to what you said. One of it was you're an IT person heading into the healthcare field and learning about, so I used to be a practicing physician. So for me to talk about IT, I had to sort of learn. So when I used to be a practicing physician and an IT guy would come, or a lady would come and speak to me about all these technologies, I would go like, what? And so, yeah, no, I think it's a very good interaction for more physicians to get into the technology aspect of how they can improve ultimately the quality of lives for their patients. So thank you. Darren, how about you? Tell us about the Inner City MD.
Well, actually, this is, Inner City MD actually has a little bit of Jeremy, a little bit of Siva in it. And I originally, like I mentioned to you guys earlier offline, is that I came at Inner City MD from watching the disparities as a pharmaceutical rep. And also I used to be in the interventional cardiology at some of the major ivory tower hospitals in New York City. We had all the bells and whistles at this East Side hospital, this West Side hospital. But and these hospitals geographically are only literally 15 minutes from my Harlem neighborhood. But yet, I would see hundreds of patients a week, a month, a year, and I would never see an African American, a Latino patient, an Asian patient. I would never see the folks who typically would have classically the heart disease, the hypertension. They weren't getting all the first line drugs and the first line defibrillators and pacemakers. So I said, well, hey, how do I educate these communities, these populations, to ask their primary care doctor, say, hey, why can't I have this new catheter? Why can't I have this ACE inhibitor? If I have this hypertensive crisis, why don't I have the latest echo in my neighborhood? So Inner City MD was about trying to bring content, both written, digital, audio, video, to physician waiting rooms in these inner cities. So originally we started as a point of care television network, like Accident Health used to be, which is now Outcomes Health, which is now Patient Point. They flipped names 1,000 times over. So Nazira, when I first met you back in Atlanta, I was pitching the Fulton County Department of Health to put up flat screen TVs in all your waiting rooms, and thereby you can actually mass educate communities of color, disadvantaged communities, on getting vaccines, nutrition tips, back to school. What vaccines do you need for your children going back to school, whether it's K through 12 or K through pre-K, Jeremy? You know what I'm saying? So, what do my kids need for pre-K or pre-K? So originally we were about bringing, because we realized that this is also from the ad tech space. Inner city communities respond best to sight, sound, and motion information. They don't like the written word. They like to hear sound on television, music or audio messages on the radio. And it should have some kind of beat to it. I don't know, not beats, but and this goes across this. I think that sight, sound, and motion sort of advertising messaging applies to all multicultural audiences, whether you're from East Asia, South Asia, whether you're from inner city Brooklyn, whether you're from it's just the brain works by hearing music, hearing voices, seeing images, and it sort of penetrates the brain better. So what we want to do in Inner City MD is we want to bring this cutting edge, or not even cutting edge, sometimes standard of care information to disadvantaged audiences who don't have access to Dr. Joe McCord in a white jacket from the 1960s. Siva mentioned having patients who are stroke patients or incontinent patients. Well, how many people really do know what incontinence really is, and how do you describe it to your doctor? And you sneeze and you tinkle, or you're a gentleman and you're having nighttime drips and drabs. We all see the Pens commercials, but how do you really enunciate and go to your primary care doctor and say, hey, I think I have incontinence? Or is it a urologist? If you're a female, as a gyno-urologist, who do I see? So we're really trying to bring this sort of baseline health information to empower these communities. And I do agree with Jeremy with healthcare. And so this is one of the things I read with Nazira also at the Department of Health. I'm bringing televisions to you guys. You guys are looking at me like I'm a health IT guy, like, oh, this is way advanced for us. And I'm like, no, this is a plasma TV that we all have at home, and you're just putting it on the wall. So Jeremy, I kind of felt the same way when I was pitching other folks, a few years back. They didn't even understand what television in a waiting room was. And so it was like 1990s medicine. I'm bringing health information media in the 2010s or 2008s to a inner city doctors group or a public health department. And they're looking at me like, this is way above our heads. We don't get this. So it's kind of ironic that we all have these same confluences. So what we decided to do, and this goes back to Siva also, oftentimes when you have rehab services, you get one or two or three pre-authorizations for that patient, and then the patient's left on their own devices to sort of figure this out. We think with InterCity MD, creating the content around stroke rehab. So let's say you're in the acute phase of stroke. What are the first 4, 5, 6, 7 exercises you can do with that patient? We would actually capture that by video, and that would be shared with the patient and the caregiver, or the patient and the spouse, or the patient and the partner. And so you can actually bring your loved one back home, watch these videos, and kind of do your own self rehab, because you've already had your 3 or 4 visits because that's what your insurance covers. So now you're on your own, and most people are not ready, or they're not savvy enough to be let go after the 4th rehab visit. So what we do at InterCity MD is we would create a physical therapy channel, or OT, occupational therapy channel, post-stroke, post-Parkinson's, or pre-Parkinson's, or peri-Parkinsonian. There's a lot of patients with other neurodegenerative diseases, MS, also have rehab needs similar to stroke patients. So we would create a MS channel, we would create a Parkinson's channel, we would create a TIA channel, and teach these caregivers and patients how to rehab yourself, because you've already exhausted your limitations on your insurance. And on the HealthIT data side, we would actually partner with, like, for example, in Atlanta has Shepherd, the Shepherd Center, which is the big rehab center in Atlanta. We would actually go to Shepherd and say, hey, what are your top 10, top 20 most common EMR codes for a stroke patient, or for somebody who's in a traumatic car accident? And say, hey, can we create a series of 2, 3, 4, 5-minute videos on how to bring your loved one home and how to rehab them? And then that would be streamed to the patient's household. Yes, there are households with limited bandwidth. I think with Biden and Harris's infrastructure plan, that may be rectified in the next 3 to 5 years. I hope that we have broadband, and even in the rural areas of Atlanta, Georgia, like Villa Rica and things like that. Even in Upper Manhattan, not Upper Manhattan, Upper New York State and the Hudson Valley, where there's still, we'll get broadband up there. So I think, and I think plus one of your future questions, but I think once this infrastructure plan that's going through Congress right now gets locked and loaded, I think over the next 3 to 5 years, I think every household, whether you are looking at a grain of corn or ear of corn, you'll have broadband at your fingertips. And as you saw also, and as a HealthIT guy, Jeremy, as you saw also during COVID hit the farms that we all get our wine from, we all get our vineyards from. COVID hit the tomato farms, the fruit farms. We couldn't find any fresh fruit in New York City because no one was picking the fruits. No one was picking the vegetables. And you saw them dumping out billions of gallons of milk right on television. You're like, what's going on? Because there was no broadband out there or no RFID tags to say, hey, we have 1,000 gallons of milk here. Come pick this stuff up and bring it down to the inner cities. So the data we like to use is the lowest common denominator. What are doctors seeing every single day in their practices? How do we help the doctor communicate better or communicate more frequently to their patients? This is what you have to do. And InterCity Medicine is about doing that via all of our common streaming devices. I mean, everyone has a smartphone. Pretty much everyone has a smartphone nowadays. That is your streaming device nowadays. That is an Android or an iOS. We all know about the streaming wars on television with Netflix versus Hulu versus Disney Plus. I think the latest numbers is that 125, 130 million U.S. households have one of those devices in their household. So we're already looking at an addressable market of 130 million U.S. households, which is by far surpassed regular linear, we call linear TV, ABC, CBS, and NBC.
Very nice, Darren.
So that's what we're really doing. We're really capitalizing on where we see urban medicine going, rural medicine going, where infrastructure is heading, where do you reach communities most readily. I will say I've also done some sort of grassroots data. I go to the Best Buy in the Bronx every couple of months. And I will tell you this, last Christmas pre-COVID, LG was selling 75-inch smart TVs for sub $600. The line was outside the door with all black and brown folks, literally 200 people deep, getting an LG smart television. So I already know that my communities of color and my disadvantaged communities have access to streaming televisions. And everyone who has a cable TV in their household has broadband. They just haven't activated that extra feature. So, to sort of wrap it all up, we are sort of taking a little bit of what Siva's seeing, a little bit of what Jeremy's seeing, a little bit of what you're seeing, Nazira, well, a little bit of what everyone's seeing. We're kind of wrapping it up and putting it into the patient household. That is the last mile, as I said in my bio. We're really at this point right now, we're almost at the last mile where everyone can get a taste of better healthcare.
Definitely. Thank you, Darren. And I know you mentioned you came to us, and I realized, okay, now do I put my RFP out? So Jeremy, you should understand that we couldn't just give him the deal and say, okay, go ahead. We had to put an RFP and he had to bid on it. So that's a long story. Yeah. But Siva, the next question is for you. So the HealthIT, of course, it does bring out better, improved outcomes, right? Faster. By facilitating, by coordinating the price reduction, there's definitely reducing of costs of doing business, and prevention of duplication of certain care as well. And the time has reduced on actually the data entry part, right? It's just the data is just there. But we want to know what has been the major successes and challenges in establishing the model that you talked about earlier, respect to the technology systems and supports. How did you address these challenges?
Right. So the primary challenge has been, I guess I'll go back to Darren, is educating physicians about it too, right? So because this is new, for example, we cannot treat a patient unless a physician prescribes it, right? So for them to understand this technology, it requires, hey, what are you guys really trying to do? You're taking physiotherapy to a patient's home, right? So we had to explain it very simply to the doctors. They're very very receptive, by the way, and we just launched. By the way, we just got FDA approval during COVID, so we were launching during COVID. That has been one of our challenges because, as Jeremy pointed out, healthcare is far behind in technology, and I have a bunch of docs in my family still can't email, so I can see where they stand. No offense to Nazira, you're a tech VZ, but my brother-in-law still needs some help with the email. So he's a nephrologist and he likes to work on kidneys rather than email. So you have to educate, okay, what is this? You have a sensor and what does it do? And you need to educate them about, that's the biggest challenge. So to educating physicians. The second has been trained professionals, because technology alone won't solve the problem, right? You still need people. So in our case, we provide coaches. See, there's sometimes psychotherapists for pain, or sometimes they are physiotherapists, right? So then you need to find those who are willing to rewire themselves from physically touching a patient to remotely treating a patient. And this is a new modality for them. Physiotherapists, for example, they're used to doing manual therapy with patients. Now you tell them to do this. They don't want to change. What is this? So those are some of the challenges I think we'll overcome. It's very similar to any new technology that gets introduced. You have this, the crossing the chasm. You probably heard of that term. You have the early adapters. But the nice thing is patients are very, very adaptive. They want to try this because it works for them. But you have the in-between gatekeepers, which is, of course, for the right reasons, the physicians. And they have to be educated. So that's one challenge I found in any new technology that gets introduced. I guess you probably found out when you introduce a new drug, that's what happens. The doctors, I remember I worked with anticoagulants, the new oral anticoagulant drugs. Doctors are used to prescribing Coumadin, right? Coumadin is like rat poison, right? And to switch them from rat poison to something, it took a while, So, it's very much similar to the change. So I mean, it's not like I'm complaining. It takes time, right? We have to understand, where they're coming from. For them, sending an email is a challenge, and you're asking them there's a new technology that's going to do rehab at home, and it will take time for them to understand. So I think people like, the inner city MD would play a major role in this thing going forward, right? Educating physicians and patients, right? And companies like yours bringing the technology and showing the benefits, outcome, and educating them, but will very, very, very important touching these patients. So those are challenges.
Definitely.
You bring up an interesting point, Siva. You bring up an interesting point in your last couple seconds there. When you start to, and this is probably one of the hard parts about being an entrepreneur in healthcare and dealing with hospital systems. When you start to when you come to a hospital system saying, hey, I have product XYZ, it'll make your hospital more relevant to your markets, more profitable. But I want to bring rehab services, and not just I want to bring clinical services to the patient household. So now the CFO is like, wait a minute, you're trying to take money out of my mouth, out of my pocket, and you want to bring rehab to the patient. Well, what am I going to do with all my 10,000 physical therapists that are on staff, my OTs? So I think as entrepreneurs, we have to be careful that we see this bright, shiny new object we're creating in the lab, whether it's development apps or whatever, and literally you're going to somebody saying, hey, I want to close you down. I want to I want to defund the hospital, defund, so I don't want to defund you, hospital. I want you to be more relevant to my needs as a consumer, as a patient, as a caregiver.
Definitely.
We definitely come across that challenge. And that's one thing we were very cognizant about. I come from pharma, so I definitely know this thing. So one of the ways we are tackling that is we are not taking away your revenue. We are actually giving you more revenue because half of your patients are not coming back for your follow-up physiotherapy because they live far away, right?
Right.
So like we show them data like, for example, simple stroke. A patient gets 6 months of stroke coverage in the in the rehab plan, but most of them don't even do 25%. The adherence of rehab, right, is so poor because of travel. So you say, hey, here are your patients. We're not taking away your revenue or anything like that. Go treat them at home by your own physiotherapist, right? From your office, from your hospital, without them coming to you because of the broadband now and availability and things. So, but you make a great point. I mean, we run into this with surgeons, by the way, right? Surgeons who prefer doing surgery for incontinence look at us like competition, right? You guys are trying to tell me that you're going to treat non-invasively incontinence by this tool.
Right.
I make money doing surgery, and absolutely that's the thing. So we don't go to surgeons.
Oh my gosh.
Right,
I wish we could get through to them, and ultimately, and that's one of the questions that I was gonna come back. Like, is it ultimately the physicians or the tech company, or is it the consumer? Who is it all about?
Yeah,
I think it's everybody.
So I want to ask, definitely. So Jeremy, the next question is time, right? We saw time is of essence, and of course leadership. What we saw during COVID, we saw some game changers, such as insurance companies accepting telehealth, expanded telehealth, COVID testing, COVID treatment. So everything happened within like just snap of fingers. It had to happen. And so, Jeremy, how important, how do you think was the response from the government, businesses, communities, and individuals for the pandemic? And how important is leadership? Because from what I knew, each county was led to be on their own during a COVID response on what to do, how to do, where to do. And I think only now, after a year and a half, they've come. So was it a good response, a moderate, or could we have done better?
I feel like
technology.
I feel like I'm going to ruffle some feathers with this. I really think that it was too slow. And When it comes to leadership, good leadership, I mean, there's the old adage that no plan survives first contact with the enemy, right? So we can come up with all of these glorious ways to solve problems and all these logistic plans to get in front of things and solve them. And then when it actually comes down to implementation, everything sort of tends to fall apart. And that's in my experience where good leadership really sort of plays the role here. Let me give you an example at Mercedes-Benz Stadium. So when my wife and I went to go get our COVID shot, I'm going to tell you, it was smooth. Like, we walked in, they gave us our armbands. The U.S. Army was there. He stuck me with a big needle. I didn't know why I got the big needle and my wife got the little one, whatever. They said I was a bigger guy, but that's not true. So I got the big needle. She got the little needle. Everybody walked out. We were literally done. And everybody's saying, this is going to be a debacle. This is going to be so bad. This is terrible. And I'm like, guys, I was in and out in like 30 minutes. I mean, it took me less time to get a COVID shot than to get a chicken biscuit at Chick-fil-A on like a Saturday morning. So I think that well-prepared leadership with good logistics can solve a lot of problems. And I think that initially everybody was just sort of throwing up our hands and saying, it's not a problem, COVID's going to go away. And while that may be true, none of us have a crystal ball that can say and control a disease of this type, right? This is one of the few pandemics we've seen in our lifetime. I'm not old enough to know about the other pandemic, right? I wasn't around when the other flu thing hit, which I don't even remember the name of, right? So it's important for us to think that leadership is they're running into something that we've never seen before, and we have to adapt very quickly, which in turn means we have to lead quickly. We have to know what we're doing. We have to have the right attack plans in place and move forward. And let me end that comment with saying that this is by no means casting shade on the many people that worked incredibly hard to get these things in place. So the logistics and the planning for the vaccine, getting the vaccine out in the first place, like those people are to be 100% commended for probably working 62-hour days to get this thing out. But from my perspective, it being on the early end of the millennials, I think we could have had a more technology-centric approach. And I think we could have solved this problem because we had literally 6 months of engineering time. And I'm going to tell you guys, I built WellEntry in 2 months, the whole thing. And it's a vaccine tracking system. It handles all of your surveys. It's HIPAA compliant. It's COPPA compliant. We're in schools. So it manages all of these things for you. And it took me 2 months and 2 engineers. This wasn't like an army of people. I didn't have hundreds of developers all typing away at their little keyboards to build this thing. A good product owner, 2 really solid engineers, a quick timeline, and a set of features that made sense in a Kanban software development lifecycle. And all of a sudden, we're spitting out a tool to manage the pandemic for our 30,000 caregiver client in less than 2 months. So I think that we definitely could get better and faster, but I also understand that there's a lot of complexity there that I probably don't understand.
Yeah.
I think a lot of things are set up to be slow motion too. You know, a lot of health systems are just endemically or classically entrenched in lard. Is it lard or molasses? I think it's molasses.
Yeah.
And they're designed just to really slow it down to a halt, making sure everybody gets their piece of the pie before it gets to the market. If it does ever get to the market.
And something else to piggyback on what Siva said earlier. I really wanted to jump in and say this because part of my discipline is there's this area called user experience, and you guys may know what that is, right? UX in the healthcare community is one of the hardest things I've seen implemented. I've worked for billion-dollar companies that will spend hundreds of millions of dollars on user studies to figure out if you're streaming thingamajig that puts NFL on your screen every day is easy for you to use, right? Mm-hmm. How many companies out there are investing in UX for healthcare? I have seen probably very few and far between of folks successfully investing in the user experience for your caregivers, the user experience for those doctors, as you were saying, that are like old school and don't want to do anything. That's not like their little niche. And to me, that's a huge opportunity that I would see companies should start potentially looking towards it, because we had a lot of adoption issues with both WellEntry and this other app that we built for this company, the EVV app. And there's just so much wrapped up in these caregivers who are of varying levels of education. It's really difficult to sort of hone in on their slice, where they live in demographics. So you're approaching a problem. You're not just selling to your average consumer. You're selling a product to a skilled individual that you need to be able to cater to their needs and how they're serving their customer in tandem. I think it's a really interesting problem that I've not seen a lot of people attack well yet.
Well, that's why we're using this. That's why this is probably one of the best UXs for content. Yeah. It's left, right, up, and down, and that's it. And everybody knows how to use it.
Yeah, you can't beat that.
Definitely. So with the piggybacking on what you just said, Jeremy, Siva, the question for you was like, even the research, clinical research was accelerated and sort of well coordinated during this COVID time, right? Clinical trials were just getting approved, which would take many, many years to even get approved. But with that said, if you can let us know what investments need to be made to ensure that community-based medical services and non-medical services can communicate electronically, just like what you all are doing, and collaborated effectively with stakeholders. And again, the question comes back, I think you mentioned in the challenges part, but what the challenges in interoperability among healthcare, human services, and community system.
Question for me, Nazira?
Yes, Siva, yes.
Okay.
I can repeat it. Just what investments need to be made so, there's good flow going through and not getting stuck.
Yeah, I think the great progress was on the clinical trial. You made a great point about that. But also, when it comes to clinical trial, we don't want to cut corners. We had to follow the right rules, because a lot of people just come in to know what clinical trial is, right? So that is, but the process of approving trials has been really, really slow, right? And that has been an issue for us. I think that probably will get resolved. Even getting a meeting with the FDA to pre-submission something was taking forever. I think those things will change, I guess, with this. But with that, I'm also cautious about, we don't want to cut corners when it comes to clinical trials. There are some rules that we need to follow. We don't want another drug which just doesn't have a control arm getting approved, right? But interoperability, I think it's a problem that's going to exist forever. Every time we invent something new, right? Because it takes time, unfortunately, and healthcare is, and also it's a regulatory industry. I come from pharma, so there was one issue that took almost 20 years to resolve, which is reporting of adverse reactions, right? Mm-hmm. Reporting of adverse reactions was initially paper-based. Then FDA probably created one of the most, Jeremy probably should take a look at and redesign that. The most, if you want me to give you an example of how a user interface should look like, I will point to that AIR system where they report adverse events. These are patients who are supposed to go report adverse events. It takes them 45 minutes to report. I'm sure somebody reporting adverse event would have a heart attack and they report that as an adverse event. Yeah, so the interoperability, but I would say the primary issue that we could resolve easily is user interface in many of the federal systems, right? We'll take a look at grant applications, for example, like simple thing, a grant application. I need to get 6 logins, right, from 6 different systems. Each one of them have their own password rules, and people give up applying for grants, right? It's because it's so difficult. It just comes back to. So interoperability is important. I think the government should work with people like Jeremy to fix the basic simple things, because we are used to using simple applications, right? If you want me to go and use the most complex application, I will not, right? You can have all kinds of interoperability, but there's no user data getting generated. What's the point, right? So I think one of the simplest things the government, I would say, should invest, which they're not, is user interface. Germany is a good example which fixed that, right? If you go to the German systems, they kind of took a new approach of redesigning from a user interface perspective, even to help physicians. Do you know that physicians don't report adverse reactions? They're supposed to report, but they never report because it's so complex. Who would spend 45 minutes reporting an adverse event? They don't get paid for. So only 9% of adverse events ever get reported in the system. I'm just talking about one because I had experience because I put in the adverse events report. But think about other things, right? So if only 9% of adverse events are reported, 91% of adverse events are not reported. So we don't know what drugs are having side effects, right? The reason being user interface.
Definitely.
The
So
only reason
Jeremy,
I'm getting is because no interpretability issue. It's just because it's so difficult to navigate the system, right?
definitely. So there's a business opportunity right there. And one of the reason Vendorship was formed, Shiva, was to help firms and companies to navigate the system to get into the government sector. So we definitely saw the void with that part. And so quickly, I know we have a few minutes and lots of questions that I've seen coming in, but definitely I wanted to touch very quickly based on probably 30-second response on a data breach, data breaches in healthcare. Might be Darren Siva, one of you, can you please take up the data breaches in healthcare, and why is it important for hospitals or the security or the government system to consider cybersecurity as a priority?
I mean, it's simple, right? How many clinical trial data got stolen by China from our systems, right? It's every country has to protect their patient data for two reasons. One is patient privacy, and second, it's national security threat, right? When you have our data get stolen, so it's I mean, look at this. A major war wouldn't have cost this, right? So what we don't want, vaccine data getting stolen and somebody pumping in wrong data, and we create a vaccine that's not even effective, right? So I would consider health data to be a national security risk, and it should be protected as much as the national security data, because a pandemic can destroy a country, and drug development would be very, very important data to be protected. And then patient privacy, right? Patient privacy, of course, everybody knows why important that is, but I think the paramount amount of security has to go into every single doctor's offices, and it needs to be protected at the national level, because health data is as important as national security data.
Definitely. So, Darren, 30-second answer. How are partnerships with stakeholders outside your immediate organization to support is important to support your model, and what resources are needed to be successful?
Rephrase the beginning part again. So how do I reach stakeholders?
Yes, and how important are these partnerships important and stakeholders?
Well, I mean, you see, we've been friends for 10 years now. So keeping in touch and constantly coming back every 3 to 6, 10 months saying, hey, what's new? Who's the new director? Can we get a meeting here? Can we get a dinner here? It's funny. Last week, I finally cleared out my Gmail from 2010, 2011. Because I had to keep putting more and more memory on my Google account. But I finally went back and said, you know what? The 2010, 2011, 2012s, those folks are long gone, changed jobs 10 times over. So let me delete all that stuff. And I actually did that as an exercise, but it was hard. But I spend most of my time day in and day out. Either I'm teaching, or I'm talking to doctors online. Or LinkedIn is my number one tool nowadays. So I'm constantly looking to see who's on LinkedIn that may be in my space, that may understand technology, that may, a lot of doctors now are doing video, their own little Facebook live chats. And I'm like, you're kind of wasting your professionalism by doing a Facebook live chat with all these bubbles flying all over the screen. I'm like, hey, come on Inner City MD, talk to us about, COVID vaccines, or talk to us about, COVID testing, and put a little professional polish on it, and come do a 3-minute video, a 4-minute video, a 5-minute video, and we'll give you your own channel. So, so instead of saying, hi, y'all, hey, y'all, no, come and say, hey, I'm Dr. Nazira. We're going to talk to you today about COVID testing in the Atlanta community. Still today, people still don't understand the difference between a PCR test, an antigen test, and a serology test. And I used to go back and forth with all of my friends. Some of them are biotech friends. They didn't know the difference about sensitivity and specificity. So, I lost my track. That's like 30
You're
seconds.
a professor.
Sorry. But staying in touch with your constituents, staying in touch with your stakeholders, trying to follow them from job to job as they hop to hop. and say, hey, you remember us back then? Now that you're a big cheese, can you give me a little slice of your cheese? Hint, Nazira. But yeah, I think it's just, we only, as entrepreneurs today, we only hear about the success stories. We didn't hear about Bill Gates as he went through 30 years of building Microsoft. We didn't hear about Jeff Bezos when his wife was funding him out of a little shoebox in 1996. We don't hear the grind. All we hear about is the gajillion dollars they have already. Steve Jobs too, before he passed or whatever, he was grinding, making keyboards in Silicon Valley in the 70s. So you got to just stay. You got to stay in it. You just got to stay in it. You got to stay in it. You got to stay in it. Hopefully, your partner, your spouse, stays with you while you're going through all these tumultuous times. And but yeah, you just got to stay in it. And one day, when it's your time, it's going to pop.
What a lovely words. What lovely words. I want to take quickly, because we're out of time, I want to quickly take two questions or three questions, one for each of you, and then a final closing comments for 20 seconds. We should be done in the next 2 minutes. Yeah. So one of the question is, probably one of you all can take this. There are several advantages to electronic health records, but how can we make it easy for someone who's not tech savvy?
That's a Jeremy question.
Wow. How do we make it easy? So I guess part of this is making sure that you run the right studies on them. Again, going back to my comment previously, I feel like we haven't really spent a lot of time understanding users. This goes back to, we'll spend hundreds of millions of dollars making sure that someone will buy something off the shelf, but we won't spend a penny on ensuring that we are delivering accurate health records, which are, by the way, your property, to other people in an electronic manner. I mean, it's like, even going back to insurance, like insurance claims on my Humana app, I can't even see my claims on my Humana app. Why can't I do that? Why can't I understand what an explanation of benefits is? Every time I get one of these things, I'm like, what the hell is this thing? I have no idea what this is. I read it and I'm like, okay, that means nothing to me. There's a lot of jargon and there's a lot of technology that can help solve this if we just develop it in the right way. People should be spoken to at their level and not spoken to like they are a physician or like they are a nurse or a caregiver or a practitioner with 4 or 5 year degree in medical coding. Instead, we need to provide things to folks that are easy to understand, that are tested using the appropriate fast feedback loops, to use some of the jargon from my industry, and also that are actually executed and tested against live people. Don't do this in a random sample group of your best friends that are going to basically confirm your confirmation bias and say, yes, you've got an awesome product here. Instead, focus on seeking out the appropriate feedback on what we're trying to deliver to these people and make sure that it's solving the right problem.
Great, Jeremy. Thank you. Darren, the next question is for you. Is technology taking over the essence of doctor-patient relationship?
It has for some time. I mean, medicine is about technology, but medicine also technology has the ability to help doctors see diseases faster, help patients heal faster. I used to put in defibrillators and pacemakers, and before there were no treatments in the 1970s, 1980s for heart block and heart failure. Now you can just pop in a pacemaker, and now we were resynchronizing the heart. You can now put a diabetes monitor on your hip, and it can sense your own blood sugar without getting 25 needle sticks. So technology has its place, and I think it's only going to get better for a lot of us chronically, not us, but a lot of our chronically diseased friends and family and colleagues and things like that.
Definitely. Thank you, Darren. Siva, final question for you and then closing comments, and then we are done. So what do you think? I think you sort of mentioned this briefly, Siva. What do you think about AI technology? Is it going to is it a complete game changer and ready to substitute existing labor tasks?
Not at all. So I built the AI company. I sold it. I ran AI for the Google of healthcare, which is IQVIA. AI actually created more jobs at IQVIA, right? So I'll give you an example quickly. The product we built was going through social media, call center data, and all kinds of medical records in hospitals to find adverse reactions that were not reported. Remember, only 9% of adverse events get reported. So you're uncovering these 91% of new adverse events which never got reported that still needs to be confirmed by human beings. We ended up hiring more people. AI created new jobs, right? It didn't eliminate new jobs.
Wow.
So basically, that's a good example. I will also say, even for physicians, even radiologists are the ones, because I have one in my family, he always fears his job is going to go away because of AI. I said, no. Do you know in Pakistan, in one area where my friend lives, there's only one radiologist for like 50 million people. So imagine these people don't have access to radiologists. Now AI could help, and to augment that, you need more radiologists, right? So the fear of AI is going to take jobs away is just not true. Maybe in about 50 years time, 100 years time, it may. But also Elon Musk says every AI will generate enough wealth, $16,000 for each individual in America, so we can all take vacation. So because it's still AI will be taxed, right? So that tax money will come to us. So we probably can enjoy more time with family. So
Yeah, very well said. Definitely, definitely.
If AI is going to
So
give more vacation time, that's good.
that's good. Yeah. So Jeremy, healthcare IT, we definitely heard about, emphasized on user-centered design and human factors. We heard about that, but where do we go from here? Just your closing comments.
I think where we go from here is where we stop being afraid, going back to the AI comment that Siva made, we stop being afraid of what technology can do for us in healthcare, because it's not going to steal your jobs. I mean, I took AI in college. I'm not probably as smart as you are, Siva, but I know how it works. It's just statistical analysis across data sets, right? And we need to embrace the fact that technology can revolutionize healthcare as we know it, and it can provide an incredible amount of value if we simply stop, take a breath, and embrace the fact that it's here to help us and it's not here to help hurt us. For example, the internet, right? Facebook, LinkedIn, none of these things have hurt you. So why are we scared of them? No, right? People claim that technology takes people's jobs away. It's created over 30 jobs at my company, where I have 30 full-time engineers who are happy and wonderfully serving their clients, building more technology to add more jobs to more companies. So I am a huge advocate. I am very, very proud to be a technologist and to be a part of the community. And I'm also very excited to explore how we can apply what we know to this industry vertical that we know needs help.
Yeah.
Definitely.
When Microsoft Excel came, accountants freaked out.
Yeah.
No accountants went out of job, right?
Right.
Definitely. Darren, where do we go from here?
I think we just just stay the course. You stay the course. Wait for. I think we have the right government people in place now to really put the emphasis behind infrastructure. Also healthcare and non-healthcare infrastructure, because a lot of social determinants of health are non-healthcare. So getting to the supermarket, getting an Uber, and believe it or not, back to our original argument. You know how hard it was to get doctors to use Uber to get more patients to their office? It was a no-brainer, but no one wanted to do Uber and Lyft to the doctor's office because it would put ambulances out of business. I mean, scratching my head with no hair. But I think we just stay the course. And Siva, we met 5 years ago in Boston at DTC Perspectives.
Oh, yeah.
Oh my gosh, you guys know each other? Oh my gosh, okay.
So he said IQVIA. I'm like, wait a minute, I know this guy. We talked for like 20 minutes. But it was so crowded there. It was so crowded.
Isn't that a small world, Jeremy?
Yeah.
So, Siva, where do we go from here?
I think there are two things that I would say, in simple words. Especially we use AI. So AI has only had benefited, in our case, treating patients, getting outcome, right? And the second thing I would say, telemedicine is going to solve a lot of access issues that not just in the United States. We only talk about in the cities, but I have patients in South Dakota who don't have access to stroke. They're on the farmland, right? So it's not solving that, and we are working with WHO to give access to proper stroke care in places in Africa, which doesn't even have a physiotherapist in a town. And Sri Lanka, where I grew up, I haven't even seen a physiotherapist in my entire life. That doesn't exist, right? Think of this technology that can bring in access and improve care, right? The AI will improve care, which we have seen in our case, right? It treats better than just simple care. Then the telemedicine gives you access. So those are simple two things I would say: the access and improvement.
Very nice. Thank you so much for your time, Siva, Darren, and Jeremy. I hope you continue to keep in touch. You have a contact address for each of you. So thank you again, all of you, for listening to us, Healthcare and IT. We learned a lot today, and the next month we do host monthly webinars. The next month's topic is technology in the education system. So with Vendorship, we make government contracting easy. And thank you for listening to us. And panelists, thank you again so much for joining us. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. Bye.